G'day and welcome down under. As the chair of the College of Sport and Exercise Psychologists of the Australian Psychological Society, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Eugene Aidman. Eugene is a fellow of the Australian Psychological Society and a founding member of the college. We call it COSA. Dr. Aidman is principal scientist at the Defence Science Technology Group based at Edinburgh Air Force Base in Adelaide, South Australia. Eugene's presentation today is entitled Cognitive Fitness Towards Conditioning the Mental Ingredients of the Peak Performance. The scope of this material is simply breathtaking. Eugene?
Thank you, John, and hello, everyone. Congratulations to the conference organizers for putting together such a diverse program. I'm sure it will be stimulating new ways of tackling what matters on the ground to our end-user communities. My background is in neuropsychology and psychometrics. I'm leading a research program on cognitive performance at Defence Science and Technology Group in Australia. In particular, I'm interested in fitness in all of its forms. I spent my PhD years measuring VO2 max and lactate thresholds. And I'm also wondering if we could have similar fitness metrics for cognitive strength, endurance, or agility. Better still, if we could train them in a gym-type setting, in addition to knowledge and skill acquisition. Turns out we can, or at least we can start unpacking the promising metaphor of mental and cognitive fitness into measurable and biologically traceable elements. Modern neuroscience is a game changer here. It drives a rapid accumulation of evidence about the inner workings of the body and the brain, and converting this evidence into usable technologies that can become much more realistic these days. My PhD actually focused on measuring mental effort, from school kids to the Olympians, and taught me not only that those measurements were linked to physical health and fitness, like VO2 max and aerobic thresholds, but that excess mental effort could lead to adverse outcomes such as overtraining and injuries. And as a postdoc in sports psychology with suicidal Olympians in my caseload, I was forced to add the space between the years, not just the physical fitness, to those fitness programming tools as I scrambled for answers to how to avoid conceding health and even lives in the service of unbalanced ambition. Well, fast forward 30 years and my work at DSTG now is focused on soldier performance, from selecting the fittest to developing training and operational support tools. Comparing it to my work as a sports psychologist made me realize that what it takes to sustain performance under pressure is remarkably common across many occupations, from firefighters and emergency crews to acute medicine, sport, performing arts, and the military. So the Cognitive Fitness Framework, or the CF2, was developed to assemble the key drivers of cognitive performance across these multiple domains. So here is the art of the possible that has exploded in the recent years. Translational neuroscience is developing at an astonishing pace, offering solid evidence for interventions that would have been considered science fiction just a few years ago. From cleverly designed reasoning strategy training that improves the thickness of your brain cortex, particularly if you have traumatic brain injury, to transcranial stimulation capable of erasing unwanted memory traces, let alone helping with your learning curves. And even brain implants. On this slide, you can see hippocampal prosthesis to replace the neural circuit that decodes your short-term to long-term memory traces and underpins everything that we learn. Currently good to compensate memory deficits, but aiming for memory booster functionality, and not surprisingly funded by DARPA. And in between, a myriad of methods informed by neuroscience and getting increasingly more realistic for practical applications, such as not relying on rolling out lab-grade equipment. And these include on-screen, off-screen cognitive tasks with and without direct brain stimulation, as illustrated in this very high-quality randomized trial. It is worth noting here that the enhancement is not the same as augmentation. So, and most of our research is aimed at cognitive enhancement, as it is no longer limited to the natural methods of enhancing ourselves through learning a new skill, for example, or using the tools such as hammer or binoculars. We can augment our sensing and perception with radars and night vision equipment and enhance it with corrective eye surgery, as Tiger Woods did, although I wonder what the Wilder would have to say about that one. We can enhance our thinking through education or training and augment it through decision support tools for our tactical decisions, such as air traffic controllers, and expert consensus building techniques like the Delphi for more strategic tasks. We can enhance our action capacity through strength and conditioning, as we all know, and augment it with exoskeletons, robotic mules, or compression garments. We can enhance our functional state through nutrition, work rest hygiene, or mental skills training, and augment it with caffeine or other fatigue countermeasures. The end result is actually the same: enhanced performance. In the field of cognitive enhancement, the distinction is typically between cognitive fitness and the tools that can amplify its impact of your performance here and now. So what are the key elements of cognitive performance we are focused on? The most basic one is alertness. To illustrate, watch the red dot ticking over the dial. You need to do it very carefully because every now and then it skips a position. This double jump is your signal to respond. Your response time in this task, its consistency and occasional lapses are important markers of your capacity to sustain attention on the task at hand. It's very basic, vigilance, but it underpins your capacity to work with this, like a radar screen, or even this. Although this is more of a futuristic rendering of helmet-mounted displays for the future soldier. Vigilance metrics are quite sensitive to fluctuations in your functional state, such as sleepiness or drowsiness, that can lead to catastrophic errors. Alertness provides the foundation for more complex cognitive functioning, such as impulse control. We use another set of tools to measure it. To illustrate, can I ask you to name the color of the font as soon as you see it on the screen? Quick and loud.
Blue, yellow, green, red. Oh, rats.
Yellow or red? So you've just experienced a response override task. This classic test, it's called Stroop test, goes back to 1930s. You respond faster and make less errors if the font color is the same as the written word. We call it congruent trials. The difference in response time and errors between these and incongruent trials, where the font color is different from the meaning of the word, is a marker of inhibition capacity or your impulse control. Closely related to inhibition control is our capacity to ignore distractions, as shown on this slide, the well-established flanker test measuring distraction costs. Here you have to ignore the direction of all fish facing, except the middle one. Okay? And when the flanks are helping, you go faster and with less errors, compared to when they mix you up by facing the opposite direction. Plus an important capacity to switch between the tasks, as rule sets change within this single tasks. That is an often typical occurrence with operator professions. Here's an illustration for it. You get a two-symbol combination with a letter and a digit in the middle of your screen. Your task is to tell the vowel from a consonant or an even number from the odd. A cue before each trial dictates which of the two rules to apply. Not only you get letter trials mixed up with number trials, you also get repeat trials when the cue doesn't change from the previous one, and change trials when it does. The difference in response time and errors between repeat and change trials is a good marker of your switching capacity, which, together with impulse control and working memory, are the core elements of the so-called executive function. a cognitive capacity to control the initiation, monitoring, and termination of all goal-directed actions. Executive functioning underpins self-regulation and self-control as we know it in sports psychology. Executive functioning is also a sensitive marker of cognitive deficit in many clinical populations, including traumatic brain injury. This is why it is routinely measured on the sidelines of any footy game to diagnose concussion, and in the battlefield with tools like this one, the Defense Automated Neurobehavioral Assessment Battery, or DANA, measuring simple reaction time, the target on the right, procedural decisions, the digit or small or larger digits on the right-hand side of the body, and impulse control in a shoot-no-shoot task. We have used this tool to measure cognitive decline in sleep-deprived soldiers. More on that later. But our daily life is critically dependent on executive functioning. It kicks in each time automatic or previously learned behavior can no longer achieve the goal. Hence, executive functioning is critical not only to real-time performance, but also for a whole range of lifelong outcomes, from academic achievement to health and longevity. And we have over 50 years of quality research to show for it. And it all started with a marshmallow. Most of you will be familiar with this experiment and sort of the fantastic seminal work by Walter Mischel and his team on delayed gratification. It started a paradigm shift nearly 60 years ago. In this marshmallow test, a 4-year-old is offered one marshmallow that he or she can eat right away, or two if they're prepared to wait for the examiner to come back. Examiner never comes back and goes past the door and watches the child waiting impatiently, typically, and that waiting time is measured until their first bite into any of the marshmallows. And surprisingly, at the time, this simple timing metrics turn out to be highly consequential. The kids from Michel's original experiments have now been followed for over 40 years now, and the pattern is very clear. Those able to wait longer for their childhood treats ended up with higher school grades, better coping skills, higher level of education and income, less conflict with the law, and even better health. So here's an illustration of the latter. For example, waiting time at the age of 4 predicts key health measures 30 years later. Here's your BMI and cardiovascular health predictions. Every extra minute of waiting for the marshmallow at the age of 4 predicted an average reduction in BMI by 0.2 on the scale. This looks like a modest gain, but in fact, it's one of the largest observed longitudinally over such a long period of time. And obesity epidemiologists would agree that it makes a big difference. Neuroscience evidence is very solid as well. Those poor at waiting for the marshmallow 40 years later suffer an overactivation in the key brain areas involved in inhibiting responses to social cues. As a result, they make more errors in the go-no-go tasks, especially where the cues are hot or emotionally charged, such as highly emotional facial expressions. Why does it matter? It does because it connects the delayed gratification at the age of 4 to the cognitive capacity that will drive, for example, a soldier's ability to discriminate their targets from non-targets in the heat of the battle. Extending the marshmallow experiment, Martin Seligman and his colleagues, the originators of both the positive psychology most of you will be familiar with, but also the comprehensive soldier fitness programs, they showed in a broad student population that self-discipline beats the IQ hands down in predicting academic performance, with an age-appropriate version of the 2 marshmallow task. They simply doubled the payment for participation to those students who participated in their experiments. To those who would agree to wait for the money to arrive in the mail rather than being given away. Lo and behold, those who chose to wait for the money to arrive in the mail were the ones with higher attendance, higher grades, and better chance of being selected into advanced academic programs. I find it rather fascinating. So self-control is even more important from a broader populational perspective. In the famous Dunedin study in New Zealand, over 1,000 newborns were assessed at multiple time points by parent, teacher, and other observers on impulsivity, inattention, frustration tolerance, and the like. The list goes on the screen there, combining to an aggregate self-control gradient score, as they call it. They were tracked for 30 plus years with comprehensive medical assessments, including cardiovascular, immune and mental health, levels of education, income, and criminal history, using actual police records. And after controlling for all possible confounds, such as socioeconomic status or the kid's IQ, the self-control gradient measured in early childhood predicted all measures of adult health, wealth, and criminality, with high childhood self-control linked to lower health risks on the left-hand panel, from the immune and cardiorespiratory to substance dependent and so forth, and to higher income and lower financial problems on the right panel. The good news here is that self-control can improve. The stability coefficients measured over a sizable age difference from age 5 to 21 is only 0.3, which is okay for the psychometricians, but it leaves 70% of variance in self-control open to improvement. Even better, change scores from age 5 to 21 added unique predictive power over and above the baseline predictor. Those who lifted their self-control rank at age 21 compared to 5 went on to improve all their life outcomes at 32. We don't know what caused the improvement. This study observed natural variability without any experiment. But imagine what a custom-designed training could do if it nudges self-control up across the population or across our target cohorts. So the bottom line, that self-control contributes to just about all important life outcomes, from real-time performance to long-term achievements in your chosen pursuits, from mental and physical health to peak performance and professional success. The evidence is compelling enough to start searching for methods of systematically improving self-control, its active ingredients, and other related elements of cognitive fitness. So what is cognitive fitness? Here is a working definition for you. Similar to the physical power, flexibility, and endurance at the core of strength and conditioning, you can think of cognitive fitness as a set of cognitive capacities, such as inhibition and cognitive flexibility, underpinning all cognitive skills, from reading and remembering to problem solving and handling stress and frustration. More specifically, it is our capacity to deploy neurocognitive resources, knowledge, and skills to perform cognitively demanding tasks and to sustain this performance over extended periods. So here are some key points in this definition. Cognitive fitness is a bunch of capacity factors that are different from knowledge and skills. Secondly, operational task performance is core to defining the relative importance of these factors, and they will change from application to application. Of course, there will be some core factors, and we'll be talking more about them in a minute. Trainability of individual cognitive fitness factors is to be established empirically, and that will lead to evidence-driven choice between selection, training, or augmentation applications. Again, and we'll talk about it a little later. And finally, sustained performance suggests that resilience, well-being, and longevity are essentially byproducts of fitness, which is quite a sort of distinct from the tradition of direct pursuits of resilience and well-being. Now, how can we distinguish these capacities from the broader set of psychological skills sports psychologists, for example, are more familiar with? The distinction is never black and white, as capacity is always embedded in skill. Like your leg press is never a perfect match to your squat, or VO2 max on a treadmill will differ from your VO2 max on the bike. We can help clarify the differences by linking them to the phases of training cycle, from the foundational to the advanced, mission-ready, and recovery phases. For example, what we call cognitive primaries, such as attention, impulse control, and co-action. that underpin most other cognitive skills can potentially be trained through the gold standard isolate, overload, recover. Sounds like your sort of standard gym approach. The protocols at the initial, and we call it cognitive gym phase. More advanced training targets at the cognitive readiness phase include stress management, arousal regulation, adaptability, teamwork, situation awareness that include important ingredients of detecting sense making and prediction, and decision making, such as working with your biases and cognitive calibration. The mission-ready training phase is focused on tolerances, from pain and sleep loss to monotony, frustration, and uncertainty, and resistances to distraction, deception, and manipulation. These capacities get further enhanced through operational support with tools such as decision aids or fatigue countermeasures. The last recovery phase completes the cycle and employs both reflexive, such as mindfulness, and restorative practices, such as healthy eating, hydration, and sleep hygiene, and relying on social support. The full cycle reinforces the cognitive fundamentals that are known for their contribution to both real-time cognitive performance and resilience that helps prevent the accumulation of chronic stress and enables career longevity and lifelong thriving. This framework connects multiple lines of research effort. For example, multiple elements of foundational cognitive training are being developed by several research groups under the construct of cognitive gym. Our emerging work on team decision-making is looking at the so-called C factor, or collective intelligence, of team smarts. This C factor has surprisingly little connection to the individual smarts of the team members, and instead has been linked to their interactional competencies and team diversity. And our augmentation work is currently focused on fatigue countermeasures. Here is an example that is particularly relevant to this audience. We all know that cognitive fatigue is a massive issue costing the economy billions of dollars in accident risks and productivity losses, and can turn deadly on the road, let alone in high-risk missions. Our field trial for a combat engineering folks aimed at measuring the levels of chronic fatigue in the unit and evaluating a method of mitigating it in extended driving tasks. For this, we trialed an infrared blink sensor mounted on a spectacle frame. Turns out that how fast you reopen your eyes after a blink is a solid marker of drowsiness, comparable in sensitivity to hospital-grade gear used to diagnose sleep disorders. Clinical trials had produced a risk scale, on the bottom left there, with the green, amber, red zones, which made this blink metric so effective that mining truck drivers around the globe have to wear these glasses with the blink data beamed up to the control center, where a trained health practitioner would watch drivers, up to 6 in a pop, and like in a daisy diagram like this one on the right-hand side, and decide on mitigation steps for each driver whose pedal turns from green to amber, let alone red. This big brother solution was not acceptable for defense. So we looked at the effect of feeding the blink metrics direct to the driver in real time on a little dashboard display. We managed to nest a randomized crossover experiment inside this pretty messy field trial, and the data confirmed that real-time feedback did actually improve alertness and reduce driving risks. Fast forward several years, and the same technology has not only gone wireless and got much neater and good-looking glasses and replaced its massive data loggers with a smartphone, but it also added a dash-mounted display that utilizes the effect that we discovered with our army drivers. When we applied the same blink sensors to monitor driving sleepiness over total sleep deprivation, up to 50 hours of it actually in some of our studies, we observed that chewing a pellet of caffeinated chewing gum significantly reduced driving errors in a simulated driving task, such as erratic acceleration, veering off the road, or crossing into the opposite lane. Much more than you would expect to result from a mild reduction in sleepiness typically attributed to caffeine intake. Those consuming caffeine got smashed nearly as badly as those who chewed a placebo gum, but made far fewer errors, and their errors did not depend on how drowsy they were. So caffeine effectively destroyed the well-known association between drowsiness and task errors. We found a similar dissociation between real-time drowsiness and task errors when we replaced driving with standard cognitive tasks, from simple reaction time to procedural decisions and response inhibition. Here it is, our recent paper in Nature Scientific Reports. This is actually quite radical. The caffeinated gum, consumed in carefully timed, safe doses, protected cognitive performance not only through its well-established mild alerting effect, as I mentioned just a second ago, but also by reducing the impact of momentary fluctuations in alertness, which are inevitable in sleep-deprived individuals. That impact on task errors was dramatically reduced. And the only way we could actually pick it up was by introducing real-time monitoring with a relatively simple sensor to match up the real-time performance output from those tasks. We had a few interesting media responses to the study. So that work also highlighted the critical role of recovery in maintaining cognitive fitness. Our fatigue profiling in the engineering regiment did not actually show any difference in chronic fatigue between our reservist group and the rest of defense, or even populational norms, despite a heavy increase in acute fatigue. So our participants in that study were smashed at the end of each day, but somehow did not accumulate any excess chronic fatigue. And we suspect this, and the data indicates that their secret was in recovery. It was self-reported in that instance, but measured with actigraphy in our other studies. So getting smashed at the end of the day is no problem if you're good at recovery. Downtime, sleep, nutrition, and it became a critical phase in the cognitive fitness framework. Here is another example. Our work on biomarkers of resilience. Just to give you some background, when we hear a sudden loud noise, like a thump or a gunshot, we respond with a spike in our heart rate, instant sweat, disrupted breathing, collectively known as acoustic startle. We can measure this stress response with multiple body sensors, the simplest being skin conductance, one of the fastest stress responses systems in your body, as you know. If the same loud noise is presented repeatedly, our stress response typically declines. We get used to the stimulus or habituate. It turns out that how fast you habituate to acoustic startle is linked to several markers of resilience. Early studies in the 90s discovered that these habituation slopes, as you can see on this slide, were sensitive enough to distinguish patients with post-traumatic stress disorder from healthy controls, and more importantly, from other clinical groups such as anxiety and depression. The PTSD folks didn't habituate at all. In our own study, we showed that the same startle slopes can discriminate between high and low resilient individuals in the relatively healthy population with no clinical diagnosis, but some of whom may be at risk. This is quite remarkable, almost a breathalyzer type objective method to assess the risk of post-traumatic stress. Extending this work to virtual reality environments is another promising direction. VR-based training is going through its own hype cycle. We all know it. The problem with desktop or armchair VR is the limited stress response it produces. Everyone knows it's a game. The free roam VR provides a more realistic and challenging environment. We were able to confirm that free roam VR can produce substantially higher stress levels, as you can see in this trial data, showing elevated heart and respiratory rate during the task. We also saw a clear dose response effect here with objectively measured stress response, increasing from walkthrough scenarios to fully blown room clearances with growing complexity of opposition force actions opposing the participants' task performance. With this methodology, we're beginning to track the stress response during training serials and introduce elements of stress management skills, such as resonant frequency breathing, with or without instrumented feedback, and to see how effective this training is in optimizing the operator's stress response. So what does the future hold for us? First, I think we'll see a push to integrating both body and brain sensors with action logging, that is, those performance markers in real time, synchronized with the physiological data streams, to enable real-time, unobtrusive measurement beyond physiology. We all know triangulation is key to actionable inferences from biometric data. Wearable systems are moving to fusing the biomarker data, such as heart rate, EMG, EEG, eye blinks, skin conductance, with embedded action loggers tracking response times, error rates, voice pitch, haptic pressure, the keystroke cadence, and other markers of cognitive capacity to track the operator's functional state. We will also see exponential growth in the virtual, augmented, and mixed reality applications, both for training and assessment scenarios. All of that has to be backed up by serious data fusion capability at multiple timescales, plus data mining, of course, and machine learning to complement and ultimately replace the conventional psychometrics. And most importantly, systematic evidence base will be built for validation of the new methods, from sensor systems to the protocols deploying them and to the inference engines to inform the end user. One of the key drivers of progress in all our work is the push for dimensional characterization and measurement of cognitive functioning. The Research Domain Framework Criteria, or RDoC in short, is the new frontiers here, developed by the National Institute of Mental Health, some of you will be familiar with that, to address the fundamental flaws of the outdated diagnostic systems, such as DSM and ICD. The RDoC identifies 5 broad domains of psychological functioning that underpin all categorical diagnostic categories. They include positive and negative valence systems, responsible for things like motivation, fear, and anxiety. Cognitive systems, including attention, working memory, cognitive control, arousal and regulation systems, and social processes, such as perception of self and others. These broad domains combine more than 40 functional constructs, and they are intended to replace the outdated diagnostic categories with biologically traceable measurement of the underlying dysfunction. This has revolutionized the clinical world. The focus has shifted from symptoms to root causes of clinical conditions, with tests spanning across conditions and things like gambling and substance addiction studied together as a dysfunction of reward responsivity under the positive valence domain in this scheme of things. Importantly, the RDoC deliberately populated its measurement space with measures at multiple levels, and that's critical to this audience. From behavior, self-reports, and physiology to neural circuits and biochemistry, and the RDoC matrix highlighting the resulting blank spots, which helps to stimulate and focus the measurement industry, including psychometrics. So you can actually make your own conclusions of where the promising market. What's critical to us is that RDoC measures are intended to span a full range from dysfunction to the norm. And all that was left to the CF2 work on cognitive fitness is to extend this logic to include peak performance. The initial mapping of the CF2 constructs is consistent with these broad RDoC domains. Our next question is about their relative importance in driving cognitive performance under different occupational settings. And that's where we rely on methods like the Delphi to develop a broad expert consensus on the dimensions of cognitive fitness. The ultimate goal here is a framework that offers a common language, agreed measurement standards, and a mapping of constructs that are worth measuring and improving in order to help our end users to meaningfully combine their well-being and performance aspirations, and to help ourselves to establish substantive and mutually enriching connections to those studying health and well-being, where the crisply defined fitness constructs become as critical to the prevention of, say, mental health conditions as they are to enhancing peak performance. To summarize, we are at a point where we can begin to define and measure the elements of cognitive fitness, to design the environments and protocols to improve it, and to develop fieldable technologies to protect and enhance cognitive performance. The framework is generating new questions. First of all, what are the pattern-forming elements of cognitive fitness? The factors that can drive change, both positive and negative, I might add, in multiple other aspects of cognitive performance. Our Delphi study, led by Monash University, is addressing this question, and we're working with an incredible international panel of experts. Next, how can we best assess the components of cognitive fitness? We're developing new measurement protocols embedded in dynamic scenarios, gamified or simulation-based. And these are real big news here, particularly when combined with biometrics and big data analytics. It is a genuinely disruptive alternative to traditional psychometrics. Then how trainable are these cognitive fitness elements? Should we train working memory or just factor in its limits into tactical decision aids? Shall we educate or train for impulse control? Or should we simply select for it if the early indications are confirmed that it is heavily genetically determined? We have a growing research effort in cognitive genomics, led by University of Adelaide, that looks into this space, and it will inform the decisions on what application types are more suitable for the different components of cognitive fitness. Is it selection, training, or operational support? And our implementation work includes the design and development of modular training programs. Here we have universities leading the defense-focused development, and our College of Sport and Exercise Psychologists of the Australian Psychological Society focused on competitive sport, both lines of effort aiming for flexible and tailored application for the end user. So we are in great company, in a groundswell of programs and applications, from non-technical skills in aviation to emergency medicine and corporate well-being, drawing from the neurocognitive, clinical, and performance sciences, and where the clinical and performance specialists stand a good chance to leverage off each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. What a wonderful presentation. Every time I delve into this material with you, it opens up so many more new avenues of thought. Clearly, you've raised so many issues here that the question becomes, how do we actually allow questions to come in? And I think that might be best handled by making direct contact with you via the email address or stripping across the bottom of the screen at present. Thank you once again for your presentation today, Eugene. Are there any other comments you'd like to offer us to round off your talk?
Thank you, John. It is an exciting space to be in, and it is exploding. So I would invite anyone who's interested in it to follow up with the links that we can provide to our work, and feel free to get in touch. There is more questions that sort of flow from our existing work that we can handle ourselves. So we're looking for good collaborations across the domains of application, whether it is sport, emergency medicine, first responders. Obviously, defense is my primary application space, but everyone is welcome. Thank you.
If I may, I'd like to add a couple of insights to Eugene's work. I've been charged with the responsibility of driving one of the projects that comprises what we think is a pretty significant part of Eugene's incredible set of joint ventures. We're calling the project the COSEP Australian Army CF2 project. I've worked in the Australian high performance system for some 40 years now, and along with my project colleagues, Jeff Bond, Graham Winter, Sandy Gordon, and Damien Stewart, we're thrilled and challenged to be part of this groundbreaking work. It's rare in a career to have the opportunity to participate in paradigm change. The CF2 paradigm will, in Steve Jobs' words, change the world. It has already changed the thinking of many professionals working in allied industries around the banner of performance psychology. CF2 seeks to bridge the divide between mental health and traditionally practiced sports psychology. CF2 technology is aimed at maximizing an individual's growth and development in a context of aligned personal and professional targets and objectives. Our project is tasked with putting some significant meat on the bones of the CF2 model. We're building a contemporary support system comprising online resources and a mobile app that will facilitate an individual's training and preparation within their domain's traditional deployment cycle. It's an exciting project that's feeding on the enthusiasm of its team members to bring together many hundreds of years of experience, knowledge, and passion for elite sport. We look forward to being able to bring you more detail about our work in the near future. In closing, our project team would like to acknowledge the thought leadership that Eugene Aidman has brought to the CF2 environment and commend this body of work to you.